if you look at what happened since George W. Bush and Obama with the invasion of Iraq, with all the Arab Spring chaos and everything that Washington has done in the last 16 years in the entire Middle East against Russia and so forth, it's been a complete failure for the American empire, for the power of the United States as the world hegemon, as the sole superpower. And last year, when Russia and China came close together as never before in their history, in economic terms, in military terms, in political terms, and they brought into that a cooperation with Turkey, with Iran, with ending the U.S. instigated wars, shadow wars in Syria, then it became clear that would that continue, America would become a banana republic. So I'm being very blunt. I'm an American and I'm being very blunt, but this is the reality. As were the case before about May of last year, and try to destroy Turkey, but use Turkey as a weapon against Russia, against Iran, against Syria, and then throw you away. That is the Washington modus operandi. They use people and then they throw them away. They use Hosni Mubarak for a certain point, and then when he starts talking about the interests of the Middle East, they throw him away and create a color revolution called Mohammed Morsi and the Muslim Brotherhood, which is a CIA operation, by the way, just as Fethullah Gulen is a CIA operation, weaponizing a pseudo-Islam to create geopolitical agenda. So the Trump operation is to, there's a triangle now called the Eurasian Triangle. I call it the Golden Triangle. China and Russia are building high-speed railway links across Eurasia, Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, other Central Asian republics. Iran is part of that. Turkey has been invited by China to join the New Silk Road, the One Belt, One Road infrastructure. And Turkey and Russia are cooperating on the Turkish Stream pipeline, at least up until now, as far as I know. And that is something that has Washington and the Pentagon freaked out. They have to somehow find a trick to bring Turkey back into the game of NATO against Russia, NATO against Iran, NATO against China. So they're trying with pretty words and so forth. They tried to do that with Putin to suggest that they might end the sanctions against Russia if Russia would do certain things in Syria, and Russia would do certain things to betray its agreements with Iran and other allies. And at a certain point, it became clear to Moscow that this was a trick, a trap that would set up Russia for destruction, and they didn't fall for it. Now they have to try to go against China, because China is an existential threat when combined with Russia, when combined with Iran, when combined with Turkey. You put those four nations together and the influence they have to create a new economic space, and the bankrupt United States of America, this, which has outsourced all of its industry in the last 35 years to Asia, to Russia, to Eastern Europe, China. The problem is the Trump administration has to rebuild the American economy. What Russia demonstrated in Syria after September 2015 with its tiny intervention was that the United States was not prepared to win a war against anybody serious, not against Russia, not against Russia and China together, Russia, China, and Iran, and forget it. So they have to rebuild the American military posture. The Pentagon has become the most corrupt money-spending machine in the world. So this is a game, and it's a very dirty game being played by very dirty people with names like Rockefeller, names like Warren Buffett, names like Bill Gates, names like George Soros, and it's a very dangerous game. In the end, it will fail because they're incompetent. They have lost their ability to expand their power. They've lost it, I would say, in the last 4 or 5 years since the war in Syria began. Turkey is a very special nation, and it could play, if it's very clear on its goal, it could play an extremely positive role, not only in the Middle East, not only in the region, but in the world. And that role would be to see itself not as a dominating power, but as a partner with Russia, with China, with the new Eurasian One Belt, One Road, the high-speed infrastructure that's developing the greatest economic market on the face of the earth for the next, I would estimate, 100 years. This is something the West has blacked out by and large. Turkey is well aware of it. President Erdogan has met with the Chinese and discussed this with them in the last 2 years. And were Turkey to engage fully on an peaceful economic basis with this, and not try to solve conflicts by military means, you would have the basis of an economic renaissance or an economic boom like Turkey has not seen in its history. As well, you would connect up with the countries, Russia and China and the countries of Central Asia, in a way that could bring new markets to life, that would bring prosperity and positive development to Turkey. Now, the coup in July of last year was a CIA coup using the networks inside the military of Fethullah Gulen. My book is due to come out in summer of this year in Turkish language, and it documents in great detail the role of the CIA in creating this machine called the Gulen Shemat, Gulen organization, to be a vehicle to completely take over the deep state institutions of Turkey on behalf of the CIA. Graham Fuller, Henry Barkey, and so forth. And when President Erdogan made a shift, the Prime Minister changed in May of last year and began to extend a peace offering toward Moscow over the bombing of the Russian jet over Syria, and began to reopen negotiations about economic relations, about the Turkish Stream pipeline, gas pipeline, about tourism from Russia and so forth. Washington began to become very alarmed that they were about to lose a key NATO member. Not that you're part of the NATO family, they use you. They've used you since Turkey joined NATO, when was it, in the 50s, as an instrument. And Turkey's a proud nation with a proud history. You don't need to be an instrument of some outside power. But you need to have a clear vision of where Turkey wants to go. And to my mind, that is rather clear in terms of the shift toward Russia, economic cooperation with China, and everything connected with that. I see no sign that they will stop their support to YPG. It's a long-standing operation to redraw the entire map of the Middle East. It goes back to a plan that George Bush put forward to the Group of Eight meeting in 2004 called the Greater Middle East Initiative, and that called for a new Sykes-Picot, so that the Kurdish part today of what is Turkey would be connected with the Syrian Kurdish part and with the Iranian Kurdish part ultimately to create a Kurdistan synthetic state. That would be a geopolitical move to weaken Turkey. Turkey would be a huge loser in that. And that is the U.S. agenda. Netanyahu is cooperating with the U.S. in that, by the way. The Israeli Likud party and the Israeli Defense Forces by rather quietly supporting Barzani and the other Kurdish militants. So it's a dirty game. It's ultimately about control of the Middle East oil and gas. And that has been a Washington strategic objective since, I would say, around the year 2001, September, to be precise. If the Trump administration would give Fethullah Gulen to Ankara or to Turkey to stand trial for his crimes, and there are great crimes, they would deliver Fethullah Gulen with cement shoes in the ocean, dead. He knows too much. They would never do that. They would never do that. His burial at sea, according to Muslim tradition, said the Navy SEALs who supposedly killed him. I don't think that was Osama bin Laden even, but they dumped the body in the ocean so that nobody could see whose DNA it was. I have researched over a period of several years in the preparation of my book, The Lost Hegemon, and with cooperation of very serious Turkish researchers. Character Fethullah Gulen was picked up by the CIA, 4 decades ago, and they decided to convert him into an imam, a religious figure. He has an education, something like a 5th grade education. He's not a scholar, he's not an intellectual, but they took him as a facade. And then they supported this network that he built up with very sophisticated brainwashing techniques like the CIA uses to recruit sect members in the Scientology or other sects that the CIA has created over the years. They set up an apparatus that focuses on young males of adolescent age, susceptible age for people, young people, in the age 12, 14, 16, in that area. And they began working with their brains, working with their minds. And then, over a period of years, they began infiltrating them, once they came out of university and so forth, into the legal system, into the courts as judges or lawyers or whatever, into the education system, very, very important, and into the military. And there are documentations that the Gulenistas got inside the military on a higher level and got a hold of the very, very rigorous and difficult tests that were administered to become an officer in the Turkish military. And they gave the answers to the Gulenists, so that over a period of 10, 15 years, up in the officer ranks, you had people loyal to Fethullah Gulen and the CIA and not loyal to the nation of Turkey. There are reports in the United States from the government, from factions of the government, that the Gulen organization finances its activities through heroin and drug operations in Central Asia. So the vast amounts of money that supposedly is behind this organization to buy television stations, newspapers, and whatnot has been built up through this covert operation over a period of 3.5, 4 decades. So the plan was to have this CIA network, this spider web called the Gulen Organization, completely take over every institution of influence in the Turkish nation. And then Turkey would become a complete vassal pawn of the United States Central Intelligence Agency. Turkey is a very proud nation with very proud people, and I don't think if most Turkish people are conscious of that, they would want that for their future. But that's what the game was about, and that's the reason that Fethullah Gulen sits in Saylorsburg, Pennsylvania, 25-minute drive away from Henry Barkey, the CIA handler of Fethullah Gulen, and close to Graham E. Fuller, the other CIA handler, both of whom, by the way, were outside of Istanbul on the night of the July 15 coup attempt. Germany today is a mess, to put it simply. Angela Merkel has lost, I would say, since 2015, lost her sense of national direction. When she opened her arms and said, any refugee in the world is welcome in Germany, for whatever reasons, if it was CIA blackmail or whatever, that was a NATO operation, the whole refugee crisis in Europe. It was a Vatican operation. The Pope in Rome is behind this on a very, very evil level. This is huge, and it's an attempt to destroy national culture, destroy national identity. It has nothing to do with Muslim versus Christian. It's to bring people from a war zone into a country that's gone through 2 world wars, lost tens of millions of lives, had their cities bombed to the ground by the Americans and the British, primarily in World War II, and slowly rebuilt their country, and then all of a sudden everything is being threatened with instability. That makes the German and American faction behind Merkel very, very upset. So you have these little incidents like the justice minister not being allowed to speak in this small village in Germany today because they claim they don't know how many people would come to hear him. And all of these things trying to be humiliating to Turkey, to be insulting to Turkey, because the Turkish government is not playing the game that Germany and Germany's government wants them to play. The problem for them, I call them, the title of one of my books, recent books, is called The Gods of Money, Wall Street and the American Century. What they want is total control of world money so that they control everything and everybody on this planet. That is not working. Russia and China are making economic agreements for oil and gas where they don't use the American dollar. The same with other countries in Asia, especially Eurasia, that they don't use the American dollar. And also the euro, as long as it exists, is an alternative to the dollar, such that once the American dollar is not the reserve currency that 60% of the world's central banks have to use, then the power, the financial power of Wall Street is dead. And that's the dilemma. They have to figure out some way to suck in the money from Europe by creating, I think, political instability in France and Greece and so forth, such that investors will say, Europe is unstable, let's go to the dollar. let's go to this Trump thing, and you know, the stock market is going through the sky and whatnot. Let's put our money there. But that's a very short-term thing. The American economy is a hollowed-out shell. As an American, I've lived through this. The outsourcing of industry, which began in the 1970s and the 1980s, has reached such a crisis dimension that there is a $12 trillion deficit.